Tanya Rivers arrived at the Sterling Heights Business Center just after 7 that evening, long before the first floor lights went out. At 40 years old, she had come to know these hallways better than most people who worked here. For the past 7 years, she had taken pride in transforming glass-walled lobbies and marble atriums into immaculate spaces by dawn. Newspapers meticulously folded on the coffee tables, silent elevators free of fingerprints, and floors gleaming as though they held up the stars themselves. Tonight, however, was different. Earlier in the evening, the center had hosted a lavish corporate gala for one of its marquee tenants. Champagne flutes had clinked, guests had drifted among art installations, and waitstaff in black vests had glided between tables laden with charcuterie and caviar. By the time the last silver tray was cleared, Tanya was already at work gathering discarded napkins, empty glasses, and strewn program brochures. She worked quickly, accustomed to the lingering swirl of confetti and the faint tang of red wine that clung stubbornly to carpet fibers. She fished her key card from the pocket of her navy blue uniform, its fabric softened by countless shifts, and swiped it at the employee entrance on the loading dock. The door clicked open, and she stepped into the cool, fluorescent-lit corridor behind the service elevators. Her handheld radio crackled with a brief status check from Marcus, the evening supervisor. "Tone, you're clear through for tonight. Let me know if you need anything." "Thanks, Marcus," Tanya replied, her voice steady but friendly. "I've got it." She stowed her radio and headed toward the main lobby on the second floor, elbowing the heavy cart laden with cleaning supplies and fresh towels. As she rounded the corner, she spotted the glossy reception desk, its surface crowded with unopened mail, visitor badges, and half-finished security logs from that night's event. She exhaled, ready to replenish the paper towels and disinfectant wipes. But before she could reach the desk, a voice cut through the hush. "Hold it right there!" Tanya froze. A young security guard she'd never met stood between her and the reception counter. His crisp black uniform looked new, the gold badge beside his nameplate gleaming under the LEDs. "Sorry, sir," she said politely. "I'm on the schedule. Tanya Rivers, night shift." He crossed his arms. "We've updated the system. No one's supposed to be back here without clearance, and you're not showing up." His tone held neither malice nor warmth, only the hard certainty of someone following protocol. "I've worked here 7 years," Tanya began, lifting her badge from her grommeted lanyard. She had applied for an updated ID weeks ago. Marcus promised it would arrive before this shift. "You can ask the past supervisors, Marcus, Sharon." He shook his head. "New rules. If you don't have clearance, I call it in." Her heart sank. She had always been polite but firm in her approach to her job, and she refused to be intimidated. Yet she could sense the guard's resolve. "Look," she said, voice calm but low, "I'm just trying to finish my work so the building's ready for tomorrow. Please check with the office." He snapped his radio to life. "Dispatch, I have a code 10 unauthorized person in secured area, requesting backup and local PD." His finger hovered over the microphone. Tanya swallowed. "Please, I assure you, I have authorization." Before she could finish, he barked into the radio, "Send officers. I need assistance." She stood still as he called, her cart wheels rolling slightly on the polished floor. Other night shift employees paused, peeking from behind service doors and janitorial closets. The guard watched her impassively, as though he were safeguarding something far more precious than a corridor that saw nothing more exciting than a mop and bucket after hours. Within minutes, 2 uniformed police officers materialized from the stairwell, their boots clicking across the tile. Tanya's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Officers," she began, "I'm Tanya Rivers. I'm the evening custodian. I have every right to be here." One officer glanced at her uniform. The other studied her cart. They nodded at each other, the kind of silent exchange that always put Tanya on edge. Without a word, they seized her wrists, clicking handcuffs into place. She lifted her elbows calmly, aware that any struggle would only confirm their suspicions. "I'm not resisting," she said, voice soft but clear. "I have my badge and clearance pending." They marched her down the hallway, past the glass offices shrouded in darkness, past the corporate plaques lining the walls, and out through the loading dock doors. Tanya's cart remained abandoned in the lobby, papers fluttering to the floor like wounded birds. She heard the guard's footsteps behind her, measuring each one with the official weight of someone convinced he had done the right thing. At the station, Tanya spent the remainder of the night in a holding cell, the harsh fluorescent lights humming overhead as she sat on a narrow bench. A thin blanket was thrown over her shoulders, the fabric scratchy against her skin. She searched her purse for her bus pass, then lay it on the bench beside her uniform cap, small talismans of her truth, though she doubted they would matter here. She thought of her daughter, Mia, sleeping at home with her grandmother, trusting her mother to return before dawn. She thought of her late father's voice telling her that dignity and patience were the only weapons people like her could wield against injustice. She closed her eyes, steadying her breathing, counting each inhale until her mind slowed. It wasn't until first light that they booked her formally. "Trespassing in secured facility," the officer said, eyeing her file. "We'll hold you until arraignment." Tanya nodded, refusing to anger them. She let them take her fingerprints, photographed her in the narrow booth, and finger-scanned her to the system. All the while, the security guard's report hovered in the digital logs. Unknown black female entering restricted area without clearance. Back at Sterling Heights, the guard had submitted his report and moved on to other tasks, convinced he had upheld policy. The building's black-tinted windows reflected the early morning sky, indifferent to the human drama unfolding just down the street. Inside, the CEO's corner office remained silent, the doors closed. The janitorial team that had peered behind doors the night before scuttled about with renewed wariness. The carts rolled down empty corridors. Business as usual. But for Tanya Rivers, the world had shifted on its axis. She sat on the metal bench in the station's common area, the sounds of other detainees echoing off the cinder block walls. She drew her battered purse closer and thought of home, the smell of fresh-baked bread in their small kitchen, the way Mia rattled her collection of toy cars across the hardwood floor before bedtime. She pictured her daughter's face when Tanya came through the door, knowing she would be safe. Still, doubt gnawed at her. What if no one believed her? What if her 7 years of service meant nothing against the weight of an unrecognized badge and a security guard's unchecked assumptions? She wanted to call her supervisor Marcus, but the desk sergeant said she'd have to wait. Personal calls were restricted until after processing. She leaned back and let the bench's hard back press against her shoulder blades. The police process ground on. The paperwork, the waiting, the vague promises of an arraignment. Later that morning, through the wired window she saw detectives filing past, their shoulders squared with disinterest. Tanya reminded herself of her father's words. Sometimes surviving is the first victory. The hours crawled forward. The station's clock ticked past sunrise, and at some point Tanya's stomach growled, a quiet but persistent reminder that she hadn't eaten since before her shift. An officer brought her a wrapped sandwich and a styrofoam cup of weak coffee. She thanked him, unwrapping the cheese and ham, and nibbled while her mind churned through every possible step to prove her identity. Her badge application confirmation email, the time-stamped CCTV footage of her cleaning the third-floor corridors, her tax forms showing the Sterling Heights address. But in the limbo of the holding cell, these documents seemed as insubstantial as ghosts. She finished the sandwich and carefully folded the wrapper before letting it fall at her feet. She closed her eyes once more, rehearsing her calm explanation for the judge, envisioning Mia's face to fortify her spirit. Just before 10 o'clock, an officer approached. "Rivers," he called. His tone was neutral, the first sign of acknowledgement. "You're free to go. The owner reviewed the footage and confirmed your employment. No charges will be filed." Relief washed over her in a warm wave. She stood, muscles stiff from hours of sitting, and followed him to the booking desk. Her handcuffs were removed. Her pulse thumped in her ears as the officer tore up the trespassing citation. "You're clear," he said. "Sorry for the inconvenience." Tanya gathered her belongings, bus pass, keys, the crumpled sandwich wrapper, and tucked them into her purse. She took a deep breath, willing herself to smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Emerging into the morning light, Tanya squinted against the glare. The city's hum felt different now, as though every car horn and passing siren carried the echo of her ordeal. But she lifted her head, squared her shoulders, and stepped onto the sidewalk. She had been mistaken for a trespasser, anonymous and suspect. Yet she carried with her the evidence of her years of service, her unbowed spirit, and the knowledge that someone with the power to see the truth, someone with the authority to intervene, had finally done so. As she crossed the street toward Sterling Heights, the building's reflective facade shimmering in the sun, Tanya realized that this was only the beginning of her reckoning, and when the time came, she would demand not only her own vindication, but a system that protected everyone who worked within these glass walls. Tanya Rivers stepped through the revolving doors of Sterling Heights Business Center the following morning with a mixture of trepidation and steely resolve. The sky was overcast, and a fine mist settled on her uniform, as if the world itself felt the weight of what had happened the night before. She drew in a steadying breath and pushed forward, this time as a free woman, but also as someone determined to confront the injustice she'd endured. Inside the lobby, the grand chandelier that normally sparkled above the marble floor appeared dimmer, as though ashamed. The security desk, once the scene of her humiliation, was empty. No cart of cleaning supplies stood in the hallway she'd tried to access. Instead, flowers and cards lay where her abandoned equipment had been collected. A small bouquet, wrapped in white paper, bore a handwritten note. "We're sorry, Tanya." "Custodial team?" She paused, her heart tugging at the gesture, but she tucked the flowers into her bag without pausing to cry. At exactly 8:45 a.m., the intercom buzzed. All employees please report to the main conference room on the 5th floor for an urgent all-staff meeting. Attendance is mandatory. The voice was clipped and unfamiliar. It certainly wasn't Marcus's calm tones. Tanya exchanged curious looks with fellow custodians as they stepped into the service elevator, ascending toward the floor above the executive offices. When the doors opened, a hush fell over the long corridor. Staff from every department, administrative assistants, bank executives, restaurant managers in the food court, clustered outside the double doors of the conference room. The Sterling Heights logo, a stylized SH, gleamed on the wall above. A polished wooden table ran nearly the length of the room, its glossy surface reflecting the tense faces around it. Seated at the head of the table were three figures. On the left, the regional property manager, Ms. Elaine Davenport, her lipstick too bright against the severity of her suit. On the right, the new security chief, Mr. Harold Conway, arms folded, and in the center, a tall man Tanya did not immediately recognize. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him like armor, and his silver hair was trimmed neatly at the temples. His presence commanded the room more than any title. "Good morning," he began, voice low but resonant.
"I'm Richard Alton, owner and developer of Sterling Heights Business Center. You may not know me by sight, but I've made it my practice to visit my properties occasionally, especially when something serious arises." He paused, eyes sweeping the room. "Last night, a longtime employee was wrongfully accused of trespassing by one of our security staff." A murmur rose from the crowd. "I've reviewed the security footage personally. I've confirmed that Ms. Tanya Rivers, who has faithfully served this building for 7 years, was performing her duties when she was stopped, handcuffed, and taken to the police station." He turned to Ms. Davenport and Mr. Conway. "This is unacceptable. Our employees are not suspects. They are the backbone of our operations." Tanya felt a flush of vindication. She met his gaze, and in that moment she saw something familiar in his eyes. Remorse, coupled with resolve. "Effective immediately," Alton continued, his tone crisp. "Mr. Conway is terminated for misconduct. Ms. Davenport, you will oversee a full review of security protocols, and I will personally ensure that the new policy incorporates bias training, clearer lines of authority, and direct escalation paths for any employee who feels mistreated." Ms. Davenport looked stricken. Conway's face reddened. He opened his mouth, but closed it again. No defense was coming. Alton then turned to the room. "I'd also like to introduce someone." The doors at the far end swung open, and Marcus stepped in, nodding at Tanya to follow. She felt every eye on her as she advanced to the head of the table. "This is Ms. Tanya Rivers," Alton announced. "She has agreed to take on a new role, Director of Integrity and Culture for Sterling Heights Business Center." A ripple of surprise spread through the room. Tanya's stomach tightened at the announcement, and she swallowed hard before speaking. "Thank you, Mr. Alton," she said, voice steady, though her heart pounded. "I appreciate your confidence in me. But before we move forward, I'd like to establish a few ground rules." She glanced around, making eye contact with custodians, receptionists, and financial analysts alike. "First, our security cameras are not just tools for enforcement. They are records of our collective actions and a check against bias. Footage must be reviewed not only for suspected wrongdoing,
but also for injustices that happen within these walls. She paused as Alton nodded encouragingly. Second, every frontline employee, from janitorial staff to baristas to delivery drivers, will have direct access to report concerns to me. We can no longer allow issues to be filtered out by multiple layers of management. Murmurs of approval rose around the table. Several people made notes. Third, I will work with human resources to implement regular workshops on unconscious bias, conflict de-escalation, and cultural competency. All security staff and contractors must attend. She fixed her gaze on Ms. Davenport. And those workshops will be mandatory, with progress tracked and tied to performance reviews. Tanya's voice grew firmer. Finally, any employee wrongfully accused or harmed while on duty will receive full support from Sterling Heights, including legal assistance if necessary, paid administrative leave, and a formal apology. The phrase formal apology seemed to draw a collective exhale from the audience. Until now, Tanya had only received a whispered sorry and a hastily discarded bunch of flowers. Alton rose and clasped Tanya's hand. These conditions are fair and necessary. I thank you for your courage in speaking them aloud. The room broke into genuine applause, warm, sustained, and heartfelt. Tanya felt tears prick her eyes, but she steadied herself, recalling her father's injunction against displays of vulnerability. When the clapping subsided, Alton spoke once more. We will implement these measures immediately. I expect weekly updates, and Ms. Rivers here will chair a new committee to oversee their rollout. Let us remember that a building is more than brick and steel. It is the people who maintain it, the people who work within it, and the people it serves. If we fail them, we fail ourselves. Over the next several days, Tanya settled into her new office, a modest corner room overlooking the loading dock, furnished with a plain desk, ergonomic chair, and a single potted plant. Marcus delivered her updated organizational chart and the mandate to convene her first Integrity and Culture Committee meeting within the week. She organized her notes, the draft curriculum for bias training, a proposed intranet portal for employee reports, and an outline of her 5-point plan. The local media caught wind of the story. The Chicago Tribune ran an article with the headline, "Janitor turned director cleans up company culture," while the neighborhood news station aired a segment titled, "From Handcuffs to Headship, One Woman's Fight for Fairness." Reporters called Marcus for interviews, and Tanya agreed to a brief on-camera statement. I am grateful to Mr. Alton for seeing me and hearing me. Now, together, we will ensure no one else here suffers as I did. At home that evening, Tanya recounted the whirlwind to her daughter, Mia, whose eyes filled with pride. Over dinner, Mia bubbled with questions. Are your cameras really going to help people? Can I see the conference room where you spoke? Tanya smiled, ruffling her daughter's hair. Soon, sweetie, soon. That night, Tanya sat at her kitchen table, drafting an email to all employees. She wrote, "To all Sterling Heights staff, my name is Tanya Rivers, and I am honored to serve as your Director of Integrity and Culture. Last week I was wrongfully detained simply for doing my job. Today, I stand before you with the power to change that reality for everyone here." Change begins with listening. Please use the intranet portal or call our hotline to share your experiences and suggestions. We will have open office hours starting Monday. No concern is too small. Thank you for your trust. Together, We will build a workplace where every person is valued. Respectfully, Tanya Rivers. She set her laptop aside and closed her eyes, feeling the energy of possibility pulsing through her. For the first time in her life, she was no longer just the unseen custodian scrubbing floors in the dark. She was a leader, charged with safeguarding the dignity of everyone in the building. As midnight approached, she stood by her window, looking out at the Sterling Heights skyline. The building's windows twinkled with lights, some offices still illuminated by overnight workers, some dark and silent. Somewhere inside, somewhere she'd walked 1,000 times, the new rules she had championed were already taking effect. Tanya smiled. She had cleaned floors in this building for years, but now she was cleaning something deeper, the culture of assumption and indifference that had allowed her to be treated as a stranger in her own workplace. And as she turned off the light and climbed into bed, she carried with her a quiet certainty that once injustice is named, it cannot be ignored, and that sometimes the smallest keycard can unlock the largest change. Spring arrived at Sterling Heights Business Center with the promise of renewal, and for Tanya Rivers, it signified the culmination of a journey she never imagined embarking upon. The magnolia trees lining the plaza bloomed in creamy white, their petals drifting like confetti across the black granite steps where Tanya often paused to collect her thoughts. Inside, the building was humming with the energy of transformation she and her Integrity and Culture Committee had set in motion. Monday mornings no longer began with the same dread. The security desk, once an adversary, was now a hub of collaboration. Guards wore small pins bearing the words "See Me" beside their nameplates, a reminder of the human faces behind every badge. Receptionists greeted custodians by name. Maintenance staff and tenant employees mingled in the cafe during breaks, sharing coffee and conversation. The often anonymous building workforce now had a shared sense of purpose and pride. Tanya's office door, once bare, now displayed the official title plate, Tanya Rivers, Director of Integrity and Culture. Inside, a framed photo captured the moment Richard Alton had escorted her out of the police station, an image of outrage turned into advocacy. On her desk lay the first edition of the Sterling Heights Transparency Report, a quarterly publication detailing incident statistics, bias training completion rates, and improvements in employee satisfaction. The inaugural report showed a 90% engagement rate in bias workshops and a 75% reduction in after-hours security complaints. These numbers were more than metrics. They were milestones. That afternoon, Tanya convened her committee in the same conference room where she'd been introduced weeks earlier. Alongside Ms. Davenport, the property manager, were representatives from housekeeping, facilities, IT, human resources, and a newly appointed tenant liaison. Tanya tapped her pen on the table. "Thank you all for your dedication," she began. "Today, we launch Phase 2, expanding our mentorship program for frontline staff and rolling out the employee voice portal company-wide." She clicked her remote, and the screen behind her lit up with a sleek dashboard. Through this portal, any employee can submit feedback, report concerns, or propose ideas directly to my office, anonymously if they choose. We'll review submissions weekly and publish a summary of actions taken. Hands shot up.
A facilities technician, Hernandez, spoke first. I submitted a suggestion last week about better lighting in the lower garages. It was fixed by Friday. He beamed.
This system really works. Others nodded, sharing quick testimonies about minor issues resolved faster than ever. Mrs. Davenport interjected, "We're also drafting a new supplier code of conduct, ensuring that all contractors, cleaning agencies, security firms, delivery services adhere to the same standards of respect and accountability we've implemented here." She turned to Tanya. "Your insights on unconscious bias have been invaluable in shaping these guidelines." Tanya smiled. "Thank you. We're creating more than policies. We're cultivating a culture of dignity." She outlined the next steps: virtual town halls, refresher courses for veteran employees, and quarterly culture walks, where managers would join frontline staff on their rounds to observe and listen. Meanwhile, the story of Tanya's transformation had reverberated beyond Sterling Heights. Local media continued to follow developments: a feature in the Chicago Sun-Times, an appearance on the midday news, and a segment on a national business podcast titled "How One Janitor Changed Corporate Culture." But perhaps the proudest moment came when Tanya's daughter, Mia, received a letter from the Alton Foundation Scholarship Fund. As Tanya read the words aloud, her voice trembled. "Dear Mia Rivers, in recognition of your mother's leadership and your own academic promise, the Alton Foundation is pleased to award you a full scholarship to any accredited college of your choice. We look forward to seeing how you too will shape the future." Mia, 13 and brimming with excitement, threw her arms around her mother. "Mom, I'm going to become a civil engineer and design schools with cleaning robots," she declared, half joking. Tanya laughed through tears, hugging her daughter close. "You can be anything you want, baby. Let's clean up the world together." On a bright Thursday morning in May, Sterling Heights hosted its first culture celebration, an event open to all employees, tenants, and community partners. The lobby was transformed with banners reading "Respect, Equity, and Community," and a stage had been set for Tanya's keynote address. Richard Alton stood in the front row, applauding as Tanya took the microphone. "Today isn't just about policies," she began, scanning the diverse crowd. "It's about people. People who, like me, have sometimes been overlooked or misunderstood. When I was handcuffed in these halls, I could have retreated in anger. Instead, I chose to speak up. And because one person listened, Mr. Alton, our building, our community, and our very purpose have been renewed." She shared vignettes of employees who had benefited: the front desk clerk, whose English was not yet fluent, but who now received weekly language coaching; the delivery driver, who reported feeling unsafe in the parking garage until lighting was improved; the security guard who admitted his own biases and volunteered to mentor others after completing training. Each story illustrated the ripple effect of accountability and empathy. As she concluded, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Tanya felt a swell of gratitude and an awareness that her work was far from over. She gestured to the Integrity and Culture Award she held aloft, engraved with her name and the date of her appointment. "This award belongs to all of us," she said, "for choosing to see each other, to listen, and to act. Let us carry this spirit forward every day." That evening, in her modest apartment overlooking the Chicago River, Tanya reflected on the journey from her first night's humiliation to this celebration of collective progress. She thought of the young security guard whose actions had inadvertently sparked a revolution, and of the difficult conversations they would soon have as part of his retraining and rehabilitation into the company's staff. She thought of the countless employees who still worked late, keeping the building running, knowing that someone was watching out for them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard Alton. "Proud of you. Let's plan our next initiative, community partnerships with local schools?" She typed back, "Absolutely. Let's turn this model outward." Tanya opened a drawer and pulled out her old security badge, the one that bore her name in tarnished metal. She placed it beside her new ID card, sleek, black, and embossed with her title. For a moment, she held both badges, feeling the weight of each. One a symbol of marginalization, the other of empowerment. The next morning, she donned a navy blazer over her uniform pants, affixed her new badge, and stepped into the corridor that had once echoed with her footsteps as an invisible custodian. Today, as she walked past the reception desks and through the glass doors of executive suites, she carried herself differently, not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had cleaned up a Culture One policy, one conversation, and one corridor at a time. She paused under the polished stainless steel sign that read, "Sterling Heights Business Center," inhaled deeply, and continued on her rounds. As cameras tracked her progress for the building's new Day in the Life video series, her voice entered the narration. "I was just mopping floors, but apparently someone had to clean up something higher up." And with that, Tanya Rivers, the woman who had once been mistaken for a trespasser, led the charge toward a workplace where every person was seen, heard, and valued.